Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with my June wrap-up. I read 16 books in June, which was kind of surprising to me because I didn't think I'd read that much, but I had a couple of really good reading days that helped. Three of the books I read on June 1st for the May Rereadathon challenge, so I included those in my May wrap-up and won't be talking about them here, so I will have 13 books to talk about today. The first 5 books I read are all from the same series, and that is the Harry Potter series. I decided to have a 24-hour Harry Potter reading marathon early in the month as part of the June Rereadathon challenge, which was to reread a series or a book from a series. I wanted to see how many of the Harry Potter books I could get through in a 24-hour period, and apparently the answer is 4.5, which is about what I kind of estimated I would do. I'm not going to be doing a full individual review on the Harry Potter series, just because it's been talked about so much, and I don't really feel like I have anything to add to the conversation. I'm not going to get analytical, I'm not going to get very critical and really in-depth, because so many people have done wonderful in-depth reviews of Harry Potter, and I just don't have anything to add to the conversation. First, I obviously read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. I gave this 4 stars. I do love Harry Potter, and I love this book. 4 stars is not a bad rating from me, by any means. But I did find it a little bit tedious at times, and it took so long to get to the plot of the story. Obviously not a bad book, it's a wonderful book, it kind of surprised me that I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as I had as a child, but still very worthwhile. The second is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I gave this 5 stars and was also kind of surprised by that. I liked this a lot better than I did as a kid, and the story just felt a lot more whole and cohesive than the first one did, and I really, really loved it. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which I gave 5 stars. This is by far my favorite of the series. It's the only book in the series that doesn't have Voldemort as the main villain, which I think I really enjoyed, and there's so much character development and building up Harry's past, and I think that's what I loved about it, and just this book has so much magic and intense nostalgia for me, and just the intensity of it and how much I felt during this book and how invested I was. This is my favorite of the series. It's always been my favorite, and probably will always be my favorite. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was number 4. I gave it 4 stars. I kind of expected to give it 4 stars. It's never been my favorite. I don't like tournament-style books, or books that have a specific list of tasks for the main characters to accomplish, because for me they wind up feeling kind of formulaic, so wasn't really expecting to love this one. I do love it, obviously, just relative to the others, not quite as much. I think this is probably my least favorite of the whole series. It drags a little bit for me. I finished those 4 on June 4th as part of my 24-hour readathon. I will link the vlog I did for that down below. And then 3 days later, on the 7th, I finished Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which I started that day and made some good progress on, but didn't quite get to finish. This I also gave 5 stars. I love it. There's so much just drama and teenage angst, and Harry's so angry, and just deservedly so. If anyone has the right to be an angry person in a book, it's Harry in this book. He's earned it. So I've never been mad at Harry for that. It always feels like, yes, be angry, yell at people, they deserve it. So I love it. This is one of my favorites of the later books, and just wonderful. Taking a slight departure from Harry Potter, I have another reread, and that was The Truth About Forever by Sarah Dessen. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. This is a YA contemporary romance about a girl named Macy who's dealing with the grief over her father's death. She meets a boy named Wes and starts having feelings for him, and kind of goes from there. This book is a lot about her character development and her coming to terms with the grief and letting herself really live and feel again instead of being very closed off. I love it so much. This is my favorite Sarah Dessen novel, and even reading it 10 years later after I originally read it, it holds up so well. It's such a beautiful story, and it's so well written. Even if you're not the biggest fan specifically of contemporary romance, this does deal a lot with grief, so it has those heavier elements in there too, but it never feels like it's too much. It feels like it's dealing with grief in kind of the lightest way possible, if that makes sense. It's not meant to be a dark, heavy book. It's meant to be a contemporary romance, but it has that underlying depth that makes it so meaningful, and I adore it. I also love Macy's relationship with her mother in this book, because I don't often see familial relationships in books that kind of feel like my family, in the way that we don't really talk Like, we don't not get along, it's just we don't really see eye to eye, so we just kind of avoid the issue altogether. And as a teenager, I loved that because I don't see a lot of that in books, and I didn't as a teenager, and it just made me feel so, like, validated in my family. And honestly, I just highly recommend this book. It's wonderful. It's a favorite. It will always be a favorite of mine, I think. Then I read The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Erik Larson. This is a nonfiction account of the Chicago World's Fair in 1892, as well as H.H. Holmes, the serial killer who was operating at around the same time in Chicago. I was buddy reading this with Cozy Reader Kelly, who I will link down below, and I will try to find the video where she talked about her thoughts on this book. I gave it 3 stars. I think she gave it either 4 or 5. She enjoyed it a lot more than I did, and it wasn't that I didn't enjoy this book, because I did. I found it very worthwhile, but I felt like it was kind of mismarketed. It's called The Devil in the White City, which kind of implies that H.H. Holmes is the focus of this book, which he isn't. I feel like this book is 2/3 about the state fair and 1/3 about H.H. Holmes, which is fine, but I kind of went in expecting him to play a larger role, or expecting it to be like 50-50 of equal importance, or to tell the story together, but instead it feels like this is a book about the World's Fair in 1892, with a little bit of H.H. Holmes thrown in. But there was also so much information that I felt kind of like bogged down in it. Like, there was so much information that I really couldn't take it all in and understand it and retain a lot of it. It felt like so much was going in and out. But if you're looking to learn more about the Chicago World's Fair of 1892, I honestly can't think of a better book for you to read than this, because there's so much information that I feel like you'll come away learning a lot no matter how much you already know about it. And it was really well done. Erik Larson does fantastic with nonfiction. I just think the topic was a little bit of a struggle for me, but I would still highly recommend if you're interested in the fair. Not so much if you're interested in H.H. Holmes. 3 stars. I was kind of expecting something different than it was, but still very worthwhile. Then I read The Big Girls by Susanna Moore. This is an adult contemporary novel set in a prison. It follows 4 main characters: a doctor in the prison, a prisoner, a guard, and an actress in California. I gave this book 2 stars. Susanna Moore as an author was recommended to me, and I just happened to pick this book up at random because I didn't really know anything about her or what to read by her, and my library just happened to have this one when I walked in that day. I don't think this was a good place to start. This book was kind of awful. Like, I got nothing out of it, and this is one of those books where I don't understand who the audience for it would be. It's set around a women's prison in first-person perspective, told from 4 different viewpoints. There are 4 different main characters who narrate the story, and it switches point of view at least once every 2 pages, often a lot more, and it doesn't tell you who's speaking. It tells you when the point of view changes because there's a paragraph break, and it's abundantly clear that the point of view is changing, but it doesn't have anything to identify the narrator. So I would spend each section that was very small, often a page or less, few paragraphs, trying to figure out who was speaking, and often it was very clear. But sometimes it was harder, and sometimes I wouldn't figure out who was speaking until the end of a paragraph, or the end of a section, and there was one section where I genuinely could not figure out who the narrator was supposed to be, and I read it 3 separate times and just, couldn't figure it out, and it was annoying. I wasn't paying attention to the story or what was happening so much as I just was who was speaking, who was narrating this. That was my biggest issue with the book. I didn't like it beyond that, but that was such a problem that it was hard for me to even, think about anything else. Next, I read I'll Be Right There by Kyung Shin, which is a South Korean historical fiction novel set in the 80s during the political unrest of South Korea. I gave this book 3 stars, and I had one singular issue with this book, much like The Big Girls, although this one was much better, and I do understand the audience for it. Kyung Shin decided not to make it specifically South Korean. She said in her author's note, which was at the end, so I didn't realize this until the end, she went out of her way not to talk about any of the political issues or anything specific that was going on politically in South Korea at the time. There was obviously a lot of political unrest in the story, but she never talked about why, how, or what was happening. She did this in order to make it a universal story, because she said the problem was not specifically South Korean, but a world issue. And this could have happened anywhere. Which is true. I understand what she was trying to do, but it didn't work for me. Reading this book and not knowing that going in, just reading it, it felt like it was written for a South Korean audience, and she didn't specifically talk about any of those things because she didn't need to, because her South Korean audience would already understand that. Her South Korean audience would know who the dictator was at the time, what people were protesting, what was happening in general, just because it's part of common knowledge in South Korea. The same way, if a book was written about the Great Depression for an American audience, we wouldn't really need to have the Great Depression explained to us, because it's common knowledge. We understand it in the general. I kind of thought that, so I was like, okay, I'm not the audience. That's fine. But that just rubbed me the wrong way, that it was an active choice on her part. If political unrest is such a big part of the story, if there are protests and disappearances and people being killed, that matters, and it matters why that's happening. It's hard to read a book that's so informed by its setting like that when you have no idea what the setting is in general. I couldn't recommend this book to people who are ignorant like I am of what happened in South Korea in the 80s. Because it's not going to make much sense, and it just feels like you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. I think if you have a decent base knowledge of South Korea in the 80s, you can probably just put that knowledge on top of this book and be fine, and it'd probably be a lot better. I have another of Kyung Shin's books on my TBR, and I do plan to read that one. And there were parts of this book that were very emotional and very touching. I just think for so much of it, there was that distance created by not knowing what was going on, that it really made it impossible for me to think about anything else in regards to this book. So I was very disappointed by that, because I do feel like this was a book that could have easily been 4 stars for me. Then I read Scythe, which is the first book in the Arc of the Scythe series by Neal Shusterman. I read this for the Literary Alliance book club on Facebook. This is not a book I would have picked up myself, and I do feel like it's good to have that knowledge going into my thoughts on this. I gave it 2 stars. I really disliked this book a lot. I found it annoying and frustrating in every way. This is about a society in which death has been overcome, but overpopulation is still a problem, so there are these people called Scythes who have kind of been ordained to kill people. They have like a specific quota of people they need to kill and specific rules to abide by, but other than that, they just kill people, and it's part of society. And it's also a perfect society with no crime that's run by a benevolent supercomputer. Not my kind of thing. Wouldn't have picked it up if it wasn't part of the book club, but it just wasn't very good. Like, the world just fell apart under like the slightest scrutiny. Nothing made sense. People have no fear because there is no death, so it's completely changed the way society works. But like, there literally is death. Like, people still die, and being afraid of Scythes seemed like it's a major part of their society. It seems like it's something people think about on a regular basis and fear on a regular basis. Even if death is less likely, it still happens regularly, which didn't make sense to me. And if the computer is such a perfect leader and the perfect benevolent god to control everything, it didn't make sense why they also wouldn't put killing and deciding who should die under control of the computer. It seemed like the computer would do it better than flawed humans, because it already went into great detail about how human leaders and political leaders were inherently corrupt. Humans were inherently corrupt. The computer was not. It was perfect. So it didn't make sense to me that it's clearly perfect to run the world, just not to kill people. And they were like, oh, but it's a human thing. Seemed like lazy justification for me. Didn't get that. At one point, a character was accused of murder, and no one seemed really shocked by this. Like, they were shocked and horrified about the same amount as a person in our society would be shocked and horrified, and that, wow, murder is bad. But not in the way that, like, their entire society is constructed on the idea that it's a utopian, like, murder doesn't happen. Crimes don't happen, period. And when this character is accused of murder, no one is, like, shook to their core over the fact that everything they thought about their society is a lie. That doesn't, like, disturb anyone. It's just, wow, murder is bad. I can't believe you committed murder. It should have been, oh my god, the society is a lie. I have been lied to. People can commit murder. And it didn't make sense. It was very annoying, very frustrating. I did not like this book at all, and I definitely won't be continuing on in the series. That made for a bit of a bad stretch, but then I read Tempests and Slaughter by Tamora Pierce, which is her first book in her new series called The Numer Chronicles, and it was wonderful. I gave it 4 stars. This follows a character from the Immortals Quartet in his youth, he attends a magical university. He is very advanced. He has a fantastic magical power, and he's going to be one of the most powerful mages in the world. Like, this is common knowledge. Like, he has a great power as a 10-year-old and is advanced through the classes, becomes friends with a prince, and essentially just character development in this book. There isn't too much plot, and I think that's kind of why it got 4 stars from me instead of 5 stars. It was just following his time at school, which is fine and lovely, but also a little boring. I love books like that when they're realistic fiction, but I do find with fantasy, I kind of do want a little more of a plot. I can't just have this day in the life fantasy because it's fantasy. Like, I want a fantastical climax and drama, and there really wasn't much of that in this book. But I do expect that to sort of be resolved later when it comes into series. I just think it was a wonderful book. It was so much fun. Like, I really adored this. I had been anticipating this since I was like 15, and Tamora Pierce announced that she was going to write it, and it really lived up to my expectations. I love this. If you're a Tamora Pierce fan, I highly recommend it. This probably isn't the place I'd recommend to start with for Tamora Pierce, but like definitely pick it up sometime because it's so worthwhile and fun. And I made a return to Harry Potter at the end of the month to finish the series, and I read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which I gave 5 stars. This is the 6th book in the series, and so wonderful, so fun. I adored it. It kind of surprised me how little happens in this book. It's mostly just like kind of drama and character development, but I loved it. It's so interesting, and it like adds so much to the story and the world that it was just a really fun read, even if it wasn't like the most dramatic of the series until the end. And the last book I read in June was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, which is the 7th and final book in the Harry Potter series. I gave it 5 stars. This is a wonderful climax. It's so intense, and it easily could have been disappointing after all the hype for the series, but it wasn't. It like lived up to every expectation I had as a child, and as an adult, it holds up as the ending. It's so wonderful. There are so many threads throughout the series that J.K. Rowling wraps up so well, and all the redemption arcs in this book, and the people who don't get redeemed, who get to turn away from evil but don't embrace goodness, who don't become redeemed wonderful people. They can still be garbage people, but they're not evil, and it allows for this gray area in a book series that was largely about good versus evil. And I loved it. It made me tear up, it made me emotional, and just the Harry Potter series is one of my favorites, and probably will always be one of my favorites, even for all the problems that J.K. Rowling herself has. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them if you have, and let me know what your favorite read from June was. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.